Hello Super Geeks, and let's take a look at building Windows Server instances on AWS Cloud. One of the challenges when you're trying to learn new skills is having computers that are available to do that. And with Linux, it's fairly easy because you can download free copies of Linux to use. With Windows, sometimes it gets a little bit more difficult. Also, Windows tends to be a little bit more resource intensive, so creating Windows machines as virtual machines on workstations sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. One of the solutions is to use AWS and install machines up on there. If you've not used AWS before, you can sign up for a brand new account and it'll be a free account by default for the first year, and there's a number of services that you can get for free for that first year. Even after that, making a machine to use is very, very inexpensive, and you can create a machine and then tear down that machine after you're done with it. Let's say a couple hours later. It's really easy to make them, so you can keep your costs down to zero or very close to it. One thing I will note is that you will want to learn how to set up CloudWatch billing monitoring so that if you accidentally turn something on that does cost, that once you get past a certain amount of dollars, that it will immediately alert you so that you can go in and take care of that. I've got mine set so that at $10 for a month, it will alert me so that I don't get any unexpected charges. But usually you can get most everything you need for free. I'm in my AWS console here. One of the first things I'm going to note here is that you've got availability zones up on the upper right corner. And I'm going to choose US East Ohio simply because that's my closest area to where I live. And you want to typically find the one that's closest to you. That way you reduce your latency when you're connecting to it. Now, what we're going to be doing is an EC2 instance in this case, and we're doing this for Windows. So we're going to go into EC2, and when we first go into the EC2 dashboard, there's a number of things down the left-hand side that you have that you can configure. Most of this is going to be way beyond the scope of anything that we're going to be doing today. If you want to really get comfortable with using AWS EC2, one of the best things you can do is find a good course on AWS, specifically the AWS Certified Solutions Architect Associate, to get a good, well-rounded base. That way you'll learn things about S3 and more about EC2 and identity and access management, a number of things. So today what we're going to do is show you the basics of setting up a Windows server that you can use for training then. Let's say if you want to go for your MCSE or you're working on PowerShell skills and you need a machine that you can do stuff on. And then the nice thing too is if you mess it up, you can just get rid of the machine and start over again. That's one of the nice things with virtual machines. So they're really easy to build and then once again, real easy to get rid of. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click on Launch Instance here. And when I go into Launch Instance, it shows me a number of machine images. Now at the very top are Linux images because they're probably the most popular that you're going to find. But as I scroll down, you'll see there's like Windows Server 2016 base, there's a deep learning base AMI that's in Ubuntu again. But there, if I go farther down, there's another Server 2016, a 2012, 2012 R2. So there's a number of Windows instances that are available. While I'm showing this, notice, number one, if it's free tier eligible, it's marked very clearly. Not all machines are free tier eligible. So these, when they're not marked, while you have them running, they're going to cost you money. So you want to be kind of cognizant of that. The other thing that I want to make a note of is if I go to AWS Marketplace, and then if I go to Software Infrastructure, then there's a number of machines here that are pre-built with certain applications. Like here's one for WordPress. This happens to be built on Ubuntu Linux, but there's a number of different applications that are already pre-built into AWS machine images. Some of them are free tier eligible. Some might be a free trial. Some will cost you right up front. And you can look at the different pricing plans. You can select a particular operating system, and they do have Windows and they do have Linux. So those are some marketplace ones if you want it like quick move into, let's say, building a WordPress site. But I'm going to go back up to Quick Start. And in this case, we're going to scroll down and I'm going to choose a Windows Server 2012 R2 base image. And this is free tier eligible. So I'm going to click Select. And when you get in here, a T2 Micro is the only machine that's free tier eligible as far as the machine type. These are defining how many CPUs and how much memory are on the machine. So I'm going to go ahead, I want to stay with free tier eligible, so I'm going to click that. I'm going to click Configure Instance. Here, I'm going to choose all the defaults because I don't really need to make any adjustments here. If I wanted to connect to, like, let's say an S3 storage bucket, I might have an IAM role that is set up for that so that I could connect to that bucket. But in this case, we're just setting up a basic machine. Now I'm going to go to Add Storage. By default, it gives a Windows machine 30 gigabyte of storage and it's SSD or solid state storage. You can obviously make this smaller. If you make it bigger, you're going to go above the free tier eligible amount of 30 gigabytes. So you have to keep that in mind. I could add additional volumes. So let's say if you have an MCSE project that you're working on learning where you're trying to learn how to set up a RAID array, you could add 3 or 4 additional volumes, then go into Windows, configure those as a RAID array. And if you're going to go over your free storage, you add those, go through the lesson. Let's say it takes you an hour. You might pay a little bit, but yeah, maybe it'll cost you $1 for the entire time that you're there, something like that. It's not going to be outrageously expensive, maybe even 50 cents, something like that. Next is to add tags. And by default, I always add a name tag. And I usually use some sort of scheme for, if I'm doing especially multiple machines for some sort of a project to test different things. So let's say on this one, for my Windows machines, I'm going to use names of spacecraft from the Apollo project. So one of them was Gumdrop. That was one of the lunar landing modules in the Apollo program. So I'm going to just simply put Gumdrop in that value. And then I'm going to go into security groups. Now, security groups here, this is where you're going to set up what protocols are you allowing into the computer. And you could select a predefined group if you have those. And I've, over time, built a number of predefined groups. But I want to go through real quick and make a new security group. I'm going to call this Demo Windows. And if you notice, it's selected RDP and it's port 3389. And here's another thing that I want to make note of is that by default right now it's set up so anybody in the world could get to this. But if I click down here and click My IP, what's going to happen is AWS is going to find out the IP address I'm coming from currently. And it's going to say only allow from this IP address. Later on, if I move my laptop, let's say if I go to a coffee shop and I'm using it from there, or if I'm VPNing in through a VPN client like Viper VPN, then I may need to reset this, but then only my machine can get into this instance. And I'm going to go ahead and do a review and launch. It gives me details of what I've selected. I'm going to click launch, and once I do that, it's going to ask me about my key pair. The key pair, for connecting to AWS instances, it's going to use public-private key pairs. It doesn't use just simply username password. So if you've not done this before, you're going to need to create a new key pair. If you have an existing key pair, you can select it. And I happen to have a key pair that I called Rusty Windows, and I'm going to select that key pair. Now, I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that I have the private key. If you are doing a brand new key pair, it'll give you the selection to download your private key. The private key is what you hang on to when you make that connection. The public key pair side of it is put on all the machines that you then create. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit Launch Instances. And it's now building that machine. If I go in and view my instances, you'll see I've got a couple of Linux instances here running, and it's building Gumdrop, which is my Windows instance, and that's sitting at pending. It will take a little bit. It usually takes a little longer for it to spin up a Windows instance than it does a Linux instance. This is going to take a little bit of time. I have my Windows private key right over here on the side, and we're going to use that then to ultimately, for Windows, generate our admin password to get into this machine. Now you can see while I was talking about that, that machine has now gone running. So Gumdrop is now running. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up my remote desktop connection, and I'm going to show my options here. And the first thing I need to do is to connect to the IP address. So I'm going to select this IP address here, my public IP address for this computer. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it in here for the computer location. The username by default is administrator. And then it's going to ask me for my password as I go in, okay? And to get that password, here's the thing that we're going to have to do. We have to go up to Actions and then Get Windows Password. And what it's going to do here is ask me for the private key file. And I went ahead and I selected that private key, and then I'm going to go ahead and decrypt the password. Now, when it decrypts the password, it gives me administrator for the username, which is we've already put in, and then here's my password that we're going to need. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy this so that I can paste it in. And then I'm going to go back to my remote desktop connection, and I'm going to go ahead and hit connect. So I'm going to put in the password, and I'm going to click OK. And then the first time you go in, it's going to ask you about the identity of the remote machine. Do you really want to do it? Because it's not able to validate that the certificate is from a trusted authority, because it's one that I generated. So I'm going to go ahead and click yes. And then it goes through the rest of the process to actually complete the connection to the machine. Now, with Windows, because this is a GUI connection, it does take a little bit of a time for this to complete out. With Linux SSH, of course, that's almost immediate because it doesn't take a whole lot. So I had paused the video until it completely logged in. It took about a minute, and it's just finishing up now. You can see that it's putting some stuff up on the screen from the login. And now we are in this Windows instance in RDP, and this is running up on the AWS system. And I could use this to do some PowerShell work. I could use this, I could make it an Active Directory domain controller. I could do other sorts of things to play around with Windows, to learn how to use the Windows Server, practice tasks for MCSE test. This is even really good for prototyping some things if you're like, well, I know I want to do something, let's say for work or some sort of a project or something like that, but I'm not exactly sure how to do it. You can go ahead and go through the process up here real quickly and real easily and say, yeah, this really works. Or if you're partway through and it doesn't work right, then you can simply get rid of the machine, create it brand new again, and try it all over again. So this allows you to create virtual machines up in the AWS system for free or very, very, very little, and try things out and not burden your local machine trying to host a lot of Windows machines. And you can do multiple Windows machines. Obviously, you may end up going over free tier if you start creating too many machines, but you could create multiple machines, work out your domain, do multiple domain controllers, and practice things that you need for that too. And it's a really, really good way of learning using Windows, using AWS as the platform.